Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 1521, Bamboo Leaves. How are you so sure that I have leftover golden lightning bamboo, Xianxia? Han Li asked with a peculiar look on his face. I can't be absolutely sure, of course, but seeing as you were able to refine 72 flying swords with the materials, there's a good chance that you'll have some spare golden lightning bamboo, which is why I mentioned it, the elderly man replied. I'm afraid I'll have to let you down, Xianxia. I don't have any spare golden lightning bamboo. I came across the golden lightning bamboo I used to refine my swords by chance, and there was only just enough of it to refine these 72 flying swords, Han Li sighed. You don't have any left? The elderly man furrowed his brows, seemingly slightly taken aback by this. That's right. I really do want the new sword art, as well as to refine my flying swords again, but I'm afraid I simply don't have the resources to facilitate this exchange, Han Li replied with a wry smile. He was telling the truth here. Even though he had that mysterious small vial and a spiritual root of the golden lightning bamboo, the divine devilbane lightning contained within the 72 flying swords had always been sufficient for him, and there were countless other things that he had to use that small vial for. As such, he didn't nurture any additional golden lightning bamboo. He was quite tempted by the exchange that the elderly man was proposing, but he could only decline. The elderly man stared at Han Li for a long while before determining that he didn't seem to be lying, and only then did he continue. If you don't have any golden lightning bamboo left, then I won't be able to give you the sword art. Actually, when you were harvesting the golden lightning bamboo, you must have obtained a lot of its leaves as well, right? A thought suddenly occurred to the man, and he inquired about the leaves of the golden lightning bamboo instead. Han Li faltered slightly upon hearing this before replying, I did indeed procure a lot of these leaves. Those leaves were quite peculiar, seemingly not wooden nor metallic in nature. I never managed to find a use for them, but they didn't seem like ordinary items, so I kept all the leaves in a safe place. Great! If you don't have golden lightning bamboo, then I can give you the sword art and the refinement method for your flying swords in exchange for those leaves. However, I won't be helping you refine your swords. What do you think? The elderly man asked as a hint of elation appeared in his eyes. That would be fantastic. Han Li replied without any hesitation. He knew that these leaves had to be quite useful for something or the elderly man wouldn't be asking him for them, but it was naturally a great exchange for him to be able to offer something that he didn't know the purpose of for something that was extremely useful to him. Thus, Han Li immediately swept a hand over his storage bracelet, and azure light flashed as two faint green wooden boxes appeared in his hands. He then tossed both of wooden boxes toward the elderly man, and a faint light flashed through the man's eyes as the two boxes drew to a halt, hovering in mid-air before him. The lids of the boxes were then lifted amid flashes of white light, and stacks of shimmering golden bamboo leaves were revealed. There's no mistaking it, these are indeed golden lightning bamboo leaves. The elderly man was able to instantly ascertain the authenticity of these leaves, and a pleased expression appeared on his face. He swept a sleeve through the air, and boxes disappeared after the lids were placed back onto them. He then flicked a finger to send a streak of white light hurtling directly toward Han Li. Han Li caught the streak of white light in his grasp to find that it was a white jade slip. I've put the new sword art and the refinement method of the flying swords into that jade slip. You can have a look at it to make sure that I'm now swindling you, the elderly man said with a smile. I wouldn't dare to think that. Han Li stowed the jade slip away without so much as a second glance at it. The elderly man nodded upon seeing this. Senior Jiang, would you be able to enlighten me and tell me what those leaves can be used for? Han Li couldn't help but ask. You must still have some of these bamboo leaves left in your possession, right, fellow Daoist Han? Rest assured, these leaves will be enough for me, so I won't make you hand over the rest. The purpose of these leaves is something that's known to very few people in the human race, but it's common knowledge in the Chang Yuan race, so there's no harm in telling you. These leaves can be used for two purposes. The first is to refine them into a type of divine lightning known as Golden Devil Vanquishing Lightning. In terms of potency against devilish beings, this type of lightning is superior even to divine devilbane lightning. It's a powerful weapon for grand ascension cultivators like me against extra-realm heavenly devils. They can also be fed to some spirit insects, and there's a very good chance that a mutation could occur. Of course, a considerable amount of these leaves must be fed to the spirit insects for that to happen, the elderly man revealed. Extra-realm heavenly devils? What are those? Han Li was perplexed. The elderly man was clearly in a very good mood, and he was a lot more talkative as he explained, "How do I say this? It's kind of like the lightning tribulations that befall us cultivators, except lightning tribulations take place at regular intervals, whereas extra-realm heavenly devils are things that all grand ascension cultivators could be susceptible to at any moment. They're completely invisible and formless, kind of like inner demons, but countless times more dangerous. Under normal circumstances, grand ascension cultivators are most susceptible to such devils when our magic power is in a severely depleted state or when our state of mind is unstable. If we're unable to resist their attack, then our souls could be corrupted, thereby reducing us to one of them. I want these golden lightning bamboo leaves so I can refine some golden devil vanquishing lightning, which will help me ward off such heavenly devils after my tribulation transcendence." A contemplative look appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. He was quite intrigued by the notion that these leaves could be fed to spirit insects to effect mutations. "By the way, are you planning to permanently settle in this place, fellow Daoist Han?" On this occasion, the elderly man spoke in a normal manner rather than transmitting his voice to Han Li. "There's too much yin qi here, which will hamper my cultivation in the long run, and I have some matters to take care of in the outside world as well, so I won't be able to stay here for too long," Han Li replied truthfully after a brief hesitation. Yuan Yao's face paled slightly upon hearing this, but she quickly composed herself thereafter, so no one noticed her shift in demeanor aside from Yang Li. A slightly peculiar look appeared on Yang Li's face upon seeing this, but she also quickly reverted back to a calm facade. "Oh, does that mean you found a way to leave this space?" A hint of a smile appeared on the elderly man's face. "Not yet, senior." Han Li rubbed his nose in a slightly awkward manner. "Ha ha, then you don't have to keep looking. I have a reliable way out of this place. Otherwise, how could I possibly reside in this holy land of the Mayfly race without a way out? I can send you on your way in a few days," the elderly man chuckled. "Thank you, senior." Han Li was overjoyed to hear this. Just as an elated look appeared on Han Li's face, the elderly man transmitted his voice to him again. "Don't thank me just yet. I don't do anything free of charge, and this is no exception. I want to make another deal with you." "Another deal?" Han Li faltered upon hearing this. "Are you interested in the divine infernal river elixir?" the elderly man asked. "You possess this divine elixir, senior?" Han Li was truly astonished this time. "I've lived for so long in this infernal river, it'd be an absolute joke if I hadn't secured some divine infernal river elixir by this point," the elderly man chuckled coldly. "Does the Mayfly race know of this? Aren't there 2 infernal lightning beasts guarding the divine elixir?" Han Li asked in bewilderment. "Do you really think 2 infernal lightning beasts can stop me? I have countless ways to secure the divine elixir without being detected by them. On top of that, I only extract a small amount of elixir every time. Even if those infernal lightning beasts come to realize what I'm doing, what are they going to do? Come and challenge me in battle to recover the elixir?" The elderly man scoffed in a proud manner. "Of course I'm interested in the divine elixir, but I really don't have anything that I can exchange for it," Han Li replied after a long silence. "I never said I wanted something for you now," the elderly man said in a meaningful voice. "Then?" Han Li's expression changed slightly. "It's quite simple. I can't leave this space as I'm trying to delay the arrival of my next heavenly tribulation, but I require some extremely important things. As long as you can gather those things for me, then bring them to me within the next 1,000 years, I'll exchange a vial of divine infernal river elixir for them. What do you think, fellow Daoist Han?" the elderly man asked. "I'll have to hear what you'd like me to collect first, senior." Rather than immediately accepting this arrangement, Han Li took a more conservative and cautious approach. The fact that Han Li was exercising such caution seemed to be an encouraging sign for the elderly man, and a pleased look appeared on his face as he swept his sleeve through the air to send another jade slip flying toward Han Li. Han Li caught the jade slip before immediately inspecting its contents, and it didn't take long before a peculiar look appeared on his face. After a while, Han Li withdrew his spiritual sense from the jade slip before raising his head with a forced smile on his face. There aren't many items listed in this jade slip, but I've never even heard of most of them. Even the ones that I do know of are extremely rare, and I could easily go 1,000 years without encountering a single one of them. Surely you're asking too much of me, Xianxia. Do you think divine infernal river elixir is some kind of normal spirit elixir, fellow Daoist Han? It's something that even body integration cultivators are willing to risk their lives for. Besides, I didn't say you had to find everything on that list. As long as you can gather 2/3 of them, then return to this place. I'll exchange the divine elixir for those things, the elderly man replied in a calm manner. 2/3? In that case, it's not entirely impossible, Han Li murmured after a brief pause for contemplation. Then do we have a deal, fellow Daoist Han? If so, I can send you out of this infernal river as my deposit. I guess I have no choice but to agree. Han Li rubbed his nose with a wry smile on his face. The elderly man smiled and said, I'll send you away from here in 2 days. Chapter 1522. Departure. Two days passed by in the blink of an eye. At the summit of a nameless massive mountain, there was a huge spell formation that was around 1,000 feet in radius. There were 8 tall platforms around the formation, atop each of which stood a giant flag with golden and silver runes shimmering on those flags. Han Li stood at the center of the formation, while the elderly man, Yuan Yao, and Yang Li stood outside it. High up in the misty sky, there was a barely visible white rift that was over 1,000 feet in length. Fellow Daoist Han, I can borrow the power of this spatial rift in the infernal river and use the formation to teleport you away, but I can't guarantee your destination. However, it's most likely the case that you'll still end up in an area somewhere near or within the flying spirit race, the elderly man said. Thank you for your words of cautions, Xianxia, Han Li replied in a respectful voice. All right, it's about time we began. I'll activate the formation and send you away from the infernal river. By the way, take this with you. When you've collected enough items, you can follow the instructions on that thing to return to the infernal river again. That thing is a disposable treasure, and I only have one, so look after it well. The elderly man raised a hand, and 2 items were sent flying toward Han Li. Han Li hurriedly caught the items before focusing his gaze on them, following which he immediately exclaimed, a star-defying plate. The 2 items in his hands were a round plate that was shimmering with white light and a blue jade slip. Oh, I'm surprised you know of this thing. However, this is only a replica of a star-defying plate, but the materials required to refine this thing are extremely hard to find. I originally refined a few of these, but I've used up all of them aside from this one. Inside that jade slip contains the method for you to access the infernal river using that plate. You can take a good look at it later. Aside from that, you can have your gold-devouring beetles back as well, the elderly man said as he swept a sleeve through the air. An azure flash of light emerged from within his sleeve, quickly revealing itself to be a miniature wooden tower. The treasure rotated in mid-air, and 2 specks of golden light flew out from within. Those were none other than the gold-devouring beetles that the elderly man had taken. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and he immediately extended a hand to draw the beetles back to him. You're incredibly fortunate to have been able to nurture mature gold-devouring beetles, fellow Daoist Han, but let me tell you this. Mature gold-devouring beetles may be quite fearsome, but they can only display their true power in large numbers. If only a few are unleashed at once, it'd be quite easy for a high-grade cultivator to trap them using a wood attribute treasure. As opposed to focusing on these beetles, it would be more beneficial to work harder on your own cultivation. Of course, if you can nurture hundreds, even thousands of these mature gold-devouring beetles, then most of the spirit realm is your oyster, as the majority of wood attribute treasures won't be able to trap so many matured gold-devouring beetles. At the same time, it's important to remember that controlling such a large number of gold-devouring beetles would be so taxing on one's spiritual sense that even grand ascension cultivators like me won't be able to handle it. Of course, if you can nurture a legendary gold-devouring beetle monarch, then even true immortals would most likely refrain from engaging you in battle, let alone a grand ascension cultivator like me, the elderly man chuckled. Gold-devouring beetle monarch. This was the first time that Han Li had heard of something like this. Oh, you don't know what that is? Ah, that makes sense. Only the mayfly race and other races that are closely affiliated with insects know of gold-devouring beetle monarchs, so I suppose it's no surprise that you're oblivious to them. If you ever get the chance to do so, you can go and conduct some research on your own about this matter. This beetle monarch is a legend that has been around for countless years, but I've never actually heard of anyone successfully refining, so it's not something to be overly fixated on, the elderly man explained before making a hand seal. A loud rumbling noise erupted from the sky above, and dense dark clouds began to surface as howling winds were swept up. The elderly man then began to chant something in the wind, and even though his voice wasn't very loud, it was still quite clearly audible. An astonishing scene then ensued. The elderly man didn't appear to have done anything else, but the massive flags on the 8 platforms suddenly tremored in unison. The flags flapped in the wind as the entire formation began to emit a faint buzzing sound. Spiritual threads of all types of different colors surfaced around the formation before sweeping toward the massive flags as streaks of light. As the 8 flags flashed within the spiritual light, bursts of astonishing spiritual pressure emanated from the formation as one rune after another emerged. Han Li was situated at the very center of the formation, so he could quite clearly sense just how fearsome the power imbued within these runes were. If any single one of those runes were to explode, he definitely wouldn't be able to withstand the explosion even with his current immensely powerful body. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he took a deep breath. Yuan Yao looked on from outside the formation, and a hint of concern also appeared in her eyes. The 8 giant flags rotated at once before blasting forth 8 pillars of light that were as thick as large bowls, all of which disappeared high up into the sky in a flash. The white rift overhead immediately shimmered with brilliant light, and instantly became several times more visible than before. The elderly man swept a sleeve upward upon seeing this, and a dull thump erupted in the air above the formation, following which an azure sword projection that was several tens of feet in length appeared amid a flash of piercing azure light. Sever! The elderly man yelled before pointing 2 of his fingers at the huge sword projection up above. The azure sword projection immediately adopted a vertical position before flying up toward the white rift in the sky. A loud ringing sound suddenly erupted in the surrounding sky as the air abruptly tightened, as if all of the world's origin chi nearby had been sucked away by this sword. In the instant before the giant azure sword struck the white rift, it expanded countless times further, taking up the entire sky as if it were a divine weapon. The azure sword then proceeded to slice open that white rift amid a loud tearing sound that was audible throughout the entire heavens. A thin long black rift emerged within the white rift, and the elderly man waved a hand through the air to dispel the gargantuan sword. At the same time, 8 gigantic runes, each of which was around the size of a cabin, surfaced near the black rift, shimmering with bright golden light. Han Li felt the air around him tighten, immediately following which the runes from the formation beneath his feet hovered toward him in unison. His heart jolted with shock upon seeing this, and just as chills were running down his spine, the runes transformed into lights of different colors before revolving rapidly around him. His surroundings suddenly blurred, and he was struck by a rush of dizziness. Following a strange high-pitched screech, a pillar of 5-colored light erupted from the center of the formation, then disappeared into the black rift in a flash. At the same time, the light emanating from the entire formation faded, and it ceased to function. At this moment, Han Li was already nowhere to be seen. Master, has Brother Han really been teleported away? Yuan Yao was unable to hide her concern any longer as she turned to the elderly man. Rest assured, Yao, the teleportation formation worked extremely well, so he should be back in the spirit realm by now. Within 1,000 years, he'll return to the infernal river again, and you two will be reunited, the elderly man chuckled. He could also sense that Yuan Yao's feeling for Han Li seemed to have gone beyond simple friendship, so there was a suggestive tone to his words. Yuan Yao blushed slightly upon hearing this, but she made no effort to defend herself as she looked up into the sky again. The black rift up above was gradually sealing over, reverting back to a white rift that was slowly blurring again. Yang Li wrapped an arm around Yuan Yao's shoulder and smiled as she said, "Let's go back, junior martial sister. It's just as Senior Jiang says. You'll see him again if fate dictates it to be so. Your cultivation base and powers may not be able to match against fellow Daoist hands at the moment, but with Senior Jiang as your master, I'm sure you'll have at least matched him by the time he returns." He, you're not wrong there. That Han brat is indeed quite an extraordinary cultivator for someone of his cultivation base, but under my tutelage, you're almost guaranteed to progress to the spatial tempering stage, and there's a 40% to 50% that I'll even get you to the body integration stage, the elderly man said in a confident manner. I'll be sure to cultivate to the very best of my abilities, master. Yuan Yao immediately rid her mind of all unnecessary thoughts and emotions as she extended a grateful bow toward the elderly man. Just as Han Li was teleported out of the infernal river, Liu Zhu, the white-haired beauty, the crimson-robed figure, and the purple-blood puppet were situated on a set of plains located countless kilometers away from the grayish-white mountain ranges, struggling to survive amid a sea of insects. There were countless winged centipede-like creatures with hooked tails swarming toward and attacking them from all sides. These strange insects were each around 3 to 4 feet in size, and they were extremely ferocious with no fear for their own safety whatsoever. At this point, Liu Zhu had already transformed into a massive black insect himself, and countless streaks of black light were erupting from his body to puncture the insects around him. The purple-blood puppet had already expanded to over 1,000 times its original size at the crimson-robed figure's behest, and it was relentlessly blasting pillars of crimson light out of its 6 eyes. The white-haired beauty had also donned her suit of black armor again, and a sea of green flames was erupting from her war hammer to keep all of the surrounding insects at bay. The demon monarchs clearly held the upper hand, but all 3 of them were extremely frustrated as no matter how many of these strange insects they killed, there was always more to replace them, and it seemed as if there were no end to their numbers. Close to 10 kilometers away, there was a praying mantis-like creature with a human facing appraising the battle from afar with a frosty look on its face. In the air above this creature, there was a semispherical object around 1,000 feet in diameter, and it was flashing erratically with silver light as countless winged centipede creatures surging toward the demon monarchs in the distance in a frenzy. Chapter 1523, Within the Mist. We can't keep going like this. That's our mayfly race's holy nest. There's no end to the creatures coming out of it. How could a golden mayfly tier being possibly possess such an item? We have to get out of her right away. Liu Zhu roared. During that split second alone, hundreds of insects were punctured and killed by the black light erupting from his body. Where can we run? These things aren't much slower than we are. If things continue like this, our magic power will be exhausted eventually, the crimson-robed figure said with a grim expression as he stood atop the purple-blood puppet. Let's head straight to the passageway that led into this place. After we get there, we'll be able to return to the infernal river and evade the insect sea manifested by the holy nest, Liu Zhu replied without any hesitation. Have you gone mad, fellow Daoist Liu Zhu? Even if we fly as quickly as we're capable of, it'd still take 2 to 3 months to get there. Are we just going to keep fighting these things during that time? On top of that, what about the devilish tomb and the devilish artifacts? The white-haired beauty screeched in a sharp voice. What good will those devilish artifacts do us if we die here? I'll give you and fellow Daoist Di Shui some treasures out of my personal collection to make up for this. The holy insects being manifested by the holy nest at the moment are only those of the lowest caliber. Once more powerful holy insects are manifested, we won't be able to get away from here even if wanted to, Liu Zhu bellowed with fury. If it weren't for the fact that the 3 of them had to work together just for a chance to get away, he would have most likely fled the scene with the divine infernal river elixir already. After all, no one was more aware that he was of just how destructive the holy nests of the mayfly race were. Of course, Liu Zhu was naturally unaware of the fact that this was only a replica rather than an actual holy nest. Even so, its devastating power was not something that the 3 demon monarchs could oppose. Hence, as soon as he witnessed this item, he was immediately struck by the urge to flee. The white-haired beauty was still quite reluctant to give up on the devilish tomb, but she knew that Liu Zhu was right. The The crimson-robed figure also remained silent, clearly in agreement with Liu Zu's proposal as well. Thus, all three of them unleashed powerful abilities in unison. Scintillating black light suddenly erupted from Liu Zu's body, following which countless massive black bone spikes appeared all over his body, all of which were around 10 feet in length and extremely sharp. He then opened his mouth to blast forth bursts of visible black halos. As soon as these halos appeared, they instantly swelled countless times in size before surging into the swarm of insects. An astonishing scene ensued. All of the insects that came into contact with these black halos instantly lost their sense of balance as they plummeted straight out of the sky, instantly opening up a vast area before Liu Zu. Meanwhile, the mountainous purple blood puppet opened its massive mouth and blasted forth a pillar of purple light that was over 10 times thicker than those erupting from its eyes. All of the insects in the path of this pillar of light were instantly reduced to ashes. As the purple blood puppet swiveled its head, the pillar of light fanned out, instantly destroying a vast number of insects. The area cleared out by this attack was even larger than that created by Liu Zu's attack. The final one to spring into action was the white-haired beauty. Seeing as the other two demon monarchs weren't holding back any longer, the white-haired woman also cast aside her qualms as she quickly made a hand seal. Her war hammer then immediately exploded within a swath of green flames, and the 8 white skulls emerged before swelling to the size of wagon wheels, then opening their mouths to unleash sharp, unsettling screeches. However, these skulls were no longer blasting green, ghostly flames out of their mouths. Instead, they produced gusts of white glacial winds that flew all of the insects in their path. Countless insects were reduced to white eye sculptures of different sizes before raining down from above. With 3 body integration cultivators attacking at once, even the relentless barrage of insects was unable to keep up, and a massive empty area was created. The praying mantis creatures in the distance harumphed coldly upon seeing this before pointing up at the silver object with one of its giant scythe-like arms. The semispherical object immediately began to rotate even more quickly, and the number of insects flooding out from within increased significantly. However, right at this moment, the 3 demon monarchs combined their magic powers to conjure up a massive ball of light around them, which allowed them to crash through the countless insects around them, thereby opening up a path that took them to the edge of the insect sea in just a few flashes. The ball of light then separated into 3 streaks of light again, all of which hurriedly fled into the distance. The praying mantis creature was clearly not expecting these demon monarchs to flee, and a furious expression appeared on its face before it let loose a sharp scream, sending the swarm of insects flying toward the demon monarchs in hot pursuit. All of these insects flew at a phenomenal speed, seemingly able to match the pace being set by the demon monarchs. Meanwhile, the praying mantis creature's body blurred, and he disappeared on the spot. In the next instant, he appeared above the semispherical object, then disappeared into it. A loud buzzing sound erupted from the holy nest, and the stream of insect projections pouring forth from it was cut off before it also flew through the air as a streak of silver light, surrounded by countless insects. Thus, the insect sea and the demon monarchs vanished into the distance in the blink of an eye. Elsewhere, Mu Qing was hovering in the air above the body of water that Han Li had been situated at several days ago, looking down with a dark expression on her face. This place seems to be. Within another vast expanse of black mist, a humanoid figure was inspecting his surroundings within a swath of grey light. This man wore a set of azure robes and appeared to be in his 20s with his brows slightly furrowed. He was none other than Han Li, who'd just left the infernal river. As soon as he recovered from his rush of dizziness, he'd immediately found himself situated within this vast expanse of black mist. Thankfully, he had cultivated his divine essence-fused light for so long that using it was second nature to him now, and it was automatically released to protect him. Han Li looked up into the air to find that the spatial rift that had just ejected him was already sealing over, and in the instant that he cast his gaze toward it, it finally disappeared without a trace, as if it had never even existed in the first place. Even though it was only for an instant, Han Li had caught sight of wisps of black chi escaping from the spatial rift right before it disappeared, then blended into the black mist around him. Could it be that all of the mist here seeped out of that spatial rift? Han Li murmured to himself before inspecting his surroundings again, trying to ascertain his current location. However, he was only able to release his spiritual sense for around 1,000 before it immediately recoiled, thereby limiting his sensory range. Han Li raised an eyebrow and stroked his chin as a thought suddenly occurred to him. He brought his hands together before separating them, and azure light flashed between his palms, following which a spirit herb that was several inches in length appeared within his grasp. He raised a hand to hurl the spirit herb into the black mist, and it immediately wilted before being reduced to dust in the instant before it drifted onto the ground below. Black infernal mist. Han Li drew a sharp breath, and he could finally confirm his current location. He had been teleported back to the massive island in the flying spirit race territory, and this vast expanse of black mist was the sea of black infernal mist that he'd refrained from entering when he was last on this island. He had conducted some tests on this black mist to find that the yin qi within it was extremely severe, and that it was able to absorb the spiritual qi within plant life and other living beings. At the time, he was in a hurry to break through his bottleneck, and he was also quite wary of this mist's strange properties, so he never ventured into it. Now, he had no choice as he had been teleported here right after leaving the infernal river. Thinking back to the black qi that had seeped out of the spatial rift, it seemed that the formation of this sea of mist most likely had something to do with the infernal river. However, the yin qi in the infernal river was definitely not as fearsome as that present in this black mist, so there had to be some other constituents that made up this mist. Han Li's eyes flashed as he made his judgment in the blink of an eye. In any case, this was most definitely not the place for a picnic, and it was best to get away from here as quickly as possible. With that in mind, azure light flashed from Han Li's body, and he immediately rose up into the air. However, after rising to altitudes of only several tens of feet, the mist around him suddenly converged toward his body, snuffing out the azure light around and forcing him to plummet toward the ground. There's a flight restriction here. Han Li's heart stirred upon making this observation. He finally understood why the Qian Peng beings were so wary of this sea of mist, to the extent that no one was stationed on this island. To the Qian Peng beings who revered the Kuan Peng as a divine deity, a flight restriction was naturally extremely dangerous. After all, most of the abilities of flying spirit race beings hinged on their wings. If they were unable to fly, then they would immediately be severely debilitated. That was, of course, only one of the reasons. It was most likely the case that the Qian Peng beings avoided this place like the plague also due to the aura of the infernal river that seeped out of the spatial rift here. After all, the infernal river was most likely the internal space of the body of a Rahu beast, so the Qian Peng beings, who possessed the Kuan Peng bloodline, would most definitely find this place to be absolutely abhorrent. However, these were all merely assumptions being made by Han Li. As for whether these reasons were valid or if there were other factors behind all this, that was something that perhaps only the elders of the Qian Peng race knew. Even though he was technically a holy disciple of the Qian Peng race, he hadn't come into contact with such matters, so he naturally didn't know the true reasons behind everything. The flight restriction in this place was quite bothersome to Han Li, but that certainly wasn't going to trap him. With his powerful body, even if he had to travel on foot, he would most likely be able to leave this place quite quickly. The only things that he had to be wary of were strange creatures potentially attacking him or other unforeseen restrictions. However, Han Li naturally wasn't going to keep waiting here. After making up his mind, he unleashed his spiritual sense to its maximal extent, then sped toward a certain direction. Chapter 1524, Spring Dawn, Azure Coil. Han Li took a step forward, and even though it didn't appear as if he were moving all that quickly, he still covered a distance of 70 to 80 feet in a flash. After a while, he'd traveled several tens of kilometers, and he was already moving slower than he normally would as a safety precaution. Otherwise, if he were charging through the mist as quickly as he could, he would have covered several hundred kilometers already. He had once skirted around most of the outskirts of this sea of black infernal mist, and even when flying as quickly as he could back them, it had taken him around a month or two to go the entire way around one side. He didn't know where he was currently situated within the sea of mist, but it would most likely take him quite a few days to emerge from this area on foot. As such, Han Li wasn't in a hurry to forge ahead. Instead, he merely progressed at an even pace while considering his trip into the Earth Abyss and the Infernal River. During this adventure, he'd had quite a few perilous experiences and had almost been reduced to a puppet by the demon monarchs, but he'd also secured bountiful rewards. He had learned the true method to use his divine Devilbane lightning from Mu Qing and also secured a vial of 5-colored peacock true blood from her. From Di Shui, he'd obtained the refinement methods for spirit servant puppets, thereby allowing him to master the refinement methods for the 9 Palaces Heavenly Talisman and the Armor Origin Talisman. On top of that, the elderly man with the Jiang surname had passed the new Azure Essence sword art onto him, along with the method to refine the Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords again. If he focused enough attention on those 2 things in the future, he'd presumably be able to make his sword formation a lot more powerful. However, none of those things were as valuable as the divine Infernal River elixir that had been promised to him. From what he knew of already, this elixir could alter one's constitution, thereby allowing one to absorb more of the world's origin chi than they'd normally be able to. This was an incredible item, and he naturally didn't want to give up on it. With this divine elixir, he'd be saving himself countless years of cultivation. For a cultivator with ordinary aptitude like Han Li, that was definitely something of the utmost importance. The items on the list given to him by the elderly man were all extremely difficult to find, but there was still hope for him if he had a time period of 1,000 years to find 2/3 of the items on the list. With that much time allotted to him, Han Li was relatively confident that he'd be able to achieve such a feat. However, what he had to do now was to return to his cave abode on the island as quickly as possible, then go into seclusion so he could consolidate the rewards that he'd reaped from this trip. Once he reached the pinnacle of the late deity transformation stage, he'd be able to take the black flame pills and attempt to progress to the early spatial tempering stage. During this journey, he'd encountered so many beings at the body integration stage and witnessed them in battle on many occasions. From that experience, he felt as if he'd attained some enlightenment, and was more confident in his ability to break through his next bottleneck. Even though the demon monarchs had refrained from giving him much guidance in cultivation, they were all immensely powerful beings, and just seeing them in action had been an invaluable experience for Han Li. After all, how many deity transformation cultivators could witness battles between body integration stage beings in person? All of these thoughts were rapidly racing through Han Li's mind, and it only took him mere moments to establish his future cultivation plan. He then swept a hand over his storage bracelet, and a jade slip immediately appeared over his palm. This was none other than the jade slip that the elderly man had given him, and within it was recorded the new Azure Essence sword art. Han Li instantly split his spiritual sense into 2, with a small portion of it controlling his body in its advancement and inspecting his surroundings, which most of his spiritual sense seeped into this jade slip. Initially, his expression remained quite calm, but as he furthered his understanding this sword art, his expression gradually became more solemn, and his brows were tightly furrowed by the end. After a while, he heaved a long sigh and flipped his hand over, upon which the jade slip disappeared amid a flash of azure light. A contemplative look then appeared in Han Li's eyes. He had roughly read through the contents of the sword art and committed it to memory. It was quite clear that this so-called new sword art hadn't really brought many changes to the original 13 layers of the cultivation method, and the insignificant changes that had been made didn't impact him in a way. The main difference was the 5 additional layers of the sword art after that. These layers of the sword art corresponded to the 3 tiers of the deity transformation stage, as well as the early and mid-tiers of the spatial tempering stage. If he were to cultivate the sword art in its entirety, it'd support him to the late spatial tempering stage. If Han Li hadn't cultivated the Provenance True Devil arts, he would perhaps truly be quite interested in this cultivation art. As things were at present, he could only pick a few useful secret techniques and abilities from the last 5 layers of the sword art to cultivate. After all, he was walking the path of simultaneous cultivation, so it certainly wouldn't be wise for him to spend so much time on this cultivation art. Of course, he was only able to achieve these things as he'd mastered the first 13 layers of the sword art in advance, and he was also a late deity transformation cultivator himself. Otherwise, even if other high-grade cultivators were to obtain this sword art, they wouldn't be able to make use of it at all. The things enclosed in the final 5 layers of the sword art that Han Li was most interested in was a pair of new sword formations, one of which was named Spring Dawn, while the other was called Azure Coil. These 2 sword formations used in conjunction with the final 5 layers of the sword art would be immensely powerful, and allow him to challenge beings of a higher cultivation base than himself. Even without cultivating the final 5 layers of the sword art, those 2 sword formations could still be unleashed, but the requirements on the flying swords used in that case were extremely stringent. They had to be extremely pure wood attribute flying swords that had been nurtured to an extremely high level. Han Li's current 72 Azure Bamboo Cloudswarm swords couldn't satisfy this condition, so he had to refine them again. Among these two sword formations, Spring Dawn was something that he could unleash with his current cultivation base, but Azure Coil would only be something that he could cultivate and study after reaching the late spatial tempering stage. As such, Han Li directed his attention to the refinement method for the flying swords enclosed with the sword art. However, a bewildered look appeared on his face only after a brief inspection of the refinement method. The method wasn't very difficult, but the process during which the swords were refined had to be an extremely lengthy one, and during this time, his flying swords would be extremely brittle and frail, making them unusable in battle. Only after completely refining the swords and achieving a state of oneness with them would be able to display their true power. According to information in the refinement method, he'd have to rid his flying swords of the auric essence he'd refined into them as well, and in that case, he wouldn't be able to unleash his aureate sword formation. That was making Han Li rather hesitant. Not being able to use the flying swords for an extended period of time wasn't too much of a concern. After all, he wasn't relying on them as a crutch anyway. However, losing the aureate sword formation really was something that made him feel quite indecisive. The new sword art stated that Spring Dawn and Azure Coil were both far superior in power to the aureate sword formation, so it only made sense to sacrifice it for those two other sword formations. However, Han Li had never witnessed those two sword formations in action, yet the aureate sword formation had helped him defeat powerful enemies on more than one occasion, so he was inevitably going to be rather hesitant. He wasn't planning to cultivate the last 5 layers of the Azure Essence sword art, so it was a mystery just how much power he'd be able to unleash with those two sword formations with just his refined flying swords alone. If it turned out to be the case that those two sword formations were inferior in power compared to the aureate sword formation, then he'd have incurred a massive loss while expending a lot of time and effort. Just as Han Li was trying to make a decision about his sword formation, his expression suddenly changed as he stood still on the spot. He peered into the black mist off to one side, and a dark expression appeared on his face as he said in a cold voice, "What are you doing lurking in the shadows over there? Were you planning to attack me?" He then raised a hand, and a thick bolt of golden light shot forth amid a loud thunderclap, forming a head-sized ball of golden lightning that hovered in mid-air. The surface of the ball was crackling incessantly with arcs of lightning and shimmering with golden runes, creating quite an intimidating sight to behold. "You're not a Qian Peng being." A surprised voice sounded from the direction that Han Li had turned his attention toward. "Who are you and how do you know that?" Han Li asked as his eyes narrowed. He, if you're truly a Qian Peng being, there's no way you'd be able to remain completely unaffected here even as a great spirit general, let alone a mere spirit general," the voice replied in a cold manner. "Oh. Sounds like you know a lot about Qian Peng beings and this place. Why have you still not shown yourself? Come out and speak to me face to face." As soon as Han Li's voice trailed off, the golden ball of lightning before him abruptly disappeared. In the next instant golden light flashed within the black mist, and the ball of lightning appeared out of thin air before exploding on the spot. Golden light flashed, and a black shadow immediately rushed out of the mist, appearing just over 100 feet away from Han Li after a few flashes. Han Li carefully inspected the being that had just appeared, upon which his expression faltered slightly. He was looking at a young man with a green face and a pair of white curved horns growing on his head. He swept his spiritual sense toward the young man to find that he was a spatial tempering stage being, and the aura he was emanating was rather familiar to Han Li somehow. He quickly traced back through his memories before abruptly exclaiming, "You're luminous beast. Wait, you have a lot of yin qi within your body, so you must have used a ghost Dao cultivation art." The young man's expression changed drastically upon hearing this, but a sinister light then appeared in his eyes. "I originally intended to let you go, but seeing as you've identified my origins, you won't be getting away from here alive." The young man then abruptly opened his mouth to blast forth a gust of grey yin winds that swept directly toward Han Li. He was clearly trying to kill Han Li in order to silence him forever. Han Li was initially regretting the fact that he'd blurted out the young man's origins, but seeing as the young man wanted to engage him in battle, a smile appeared on his face instead. He merely stood still on the spot, but the grey light around his body swelled drastically before revolving around Han Li, sweeping aside all of the oncoming gusts of yin winds. A flash of astonishment appeared in the young man's eyes upon seeing this, but he immediately slapped a hand onto his own head, upon which his twin horns detached themselves from his body, then transformed into a pair of shimmering white scimitars that landed in his grasp. With the new weapons, the young man seemed to have been injected with a surge of confidence, and he stomped a foot into the ground, charging toward Han Li at an incredible speed, leaving a trail of afterimages in his wake. The young man was seen to be intent on challenging Han Li in melee combat, and a peculiar look flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this. Instead of taking any evasive measures, brilliant golden light suddenly erupted from his body as he stood still on the spot. A layer of golden scales appeared over his skin, and at the same time, a golden projection with 3 heads and 6 arms surfaced behind him. Chapter 1525. Returning to the cave abode. The young man faltered slightly upon seeing the projection and scales that Han Li had conjured, but he didn't slow down in the slightest as he slashed his twin sabers through the air toward Han Li. A pair of black saber formations instantly hurtled forth in a cross formation. As soon as these saber projections appeared, all of the nearby black mist surged toward them in a frenzy. The 2 saber projections instantly swelled to around twice their original size before reaching Han Li in the blink of an eye. Han Li's eyelids twitched as his hands blurred slightly, and a pair of golden longswords suddenly appeared in his grasp. With a flick of his wrists, he slashed his longswords toward the saber projections in a merciless manner. A loud thunderclap erupted as golden arcs of lightning coiled around the long swords. As soon as the black saber projections clashed with the golden lightning, the former was instantly vanquished, much to the shock of the young man. In contrast, a cold smile appeared on Han Li's face. The saber projections unleashed by his opponent clearly contained a lot of devilish chi. Otherwise, even his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords wouldn't have been able to take care of them so easily. Seeing as this was the case, this young man was essentially committing suicide through his decision to challenge Han Li. With that in mind, Han Li flapped the 5-colored translucent wing on his back, sending forth a burst of 5-colored light before the young man had recovered from his astonishment. The light was extremely bright and piercing, as if a 5-colored sun had surfaced from within Han Li's body. Ah! The young man reflexively closed his eyes in the face of such scintillating light, and at the same time, he knew that he was in a perilous situation, so he stomped both feet violently into the ground and shot back like an arrow, retreating even faster than he'd come. At this moment, a thunderclap erupted from within the 5-colored light, following which an arc of azure and white lightning flashed behind the young man, and Han Li abruptly appeared out of thin air. He then slashed his 2 long swords toward his opponent with devastating force. The young man's eyes were still closed and his spiritual sense was slightly delayed in its reaction, but such a blatant attack certainly couldn't escape his notice. As such, he immediately tossed his twin sabers behind him, and they shot forth as 2 streaks of black light. He then made a hand seal, and the muscles on his body instantly disappeared, revealing a translucent white jade-like skeleton. The skeleton tremored before releasing a white barrier of light that completely shielded its body within. Han Li's long sword came crashing down amid a couple of thunderclaps, only to be kept at bay by the streaks of black light formed by the twin sabers. Han Li didn't find this to be strange or unexpected in the slightest. Instead, he'd be surprised if a pair of weapons manifested from a spatial tempering stage demon beast's body didn't possess this much power. He had never intended or hoped to kill this demon beast with this pair of flying swords alone. In the instant that he'd lashed out with his swords, the Provenance True Devil projection swung its 6 arms through the air, and countless fist projections immediately blossomed like golden lotus flowers before crashing toward the white light barrier like a torrential downpour. Each and every one of the seemingly ordinary fist projections were imbued with Han Li's immense inhuman strength, and this overwhelming storm of attacks was something that had been unleashed through brute force alone. In the instant the white barrier of light was struck the fist projections, the seemingly resolute barrier immediately began to tremor violently before quickly being shattered by the devastating fist projections. All of this had taken place in only the blink of an eye, and only then did the demon beast twist around before opening its eyes. Having had all of its flesh and blood disappear, his eyeballs were also nowhere to be seen, and had instead been replaced by 2 balls of green flames in his eye sockets. The demon beast was mortified that his protective barrier of light had been destroyed so easily, and he immediately opened his mouth to blast forth several inky black streaks of light toward Han Li. At the same time, his head exploded of its own accord, following which a green bead shot forth from within and hurtled toward the distance. The remnants of his skeletal body quickly disassembled itself before forming a white bone shield that followed closely behind the green bead to protect it during his escape. The demon beast had clearly identified that he was no match for Han Li, and immediately tried to flee the scene. He had cultivated for many years within this black infernal mist, and he was confident that if he could open up some distance between himself and Han Li, there was no way that the latter would be able to chase him down. However, Han Li was already intent on killing him at this point. He didn't want to let this demon beast get away, only to return and potentially cause trouble for him in the future. Thus, he let loose a cold harumph as the grey light before him flashed. The streaks of oncoming black light merely fizzled out almost as soon as they came into contact with this grey light. All of the golden fist projections in the air also abruptly disappeared while golden light flashed from his provenance true devil projection. 6 thick bolts of lightning then surfaced from the hands attached to the projection's 6 arms, and the 6 arcs of lightning transformed into 6 golden lightning spears in unison. The arms then blurred as the 6 golden spears were hurled through the air. The golden spear streaked through before crashing viciously into the white bone shield. To the credit of the shield, it was able to withstand the first 3 spears, but after being struck by the 4th spear, it finally exploded. The final 2 spears pierced through as a result, striking the green bead at the same time. Golden arcs of lightning flashed, and the green bead flashed erratically before exploding. The projection of a luminous beast shot forth from within in a horrified manner. However, the golden arcs of lightning had already formed an inescapable net around the soul of this demon beast, and as the net converged, a blood-curdling howl erupted from within before the projection of the luminous beast was completely destroyed. Han Li had slain this spatial tempering stage demon beast with ease. Part of this was due to the fact that the demon beast had been too complacent after seeing Han Li's deity transformation stage cultivation base, but this was also contributed to by the fact that Han Li had become far more powerful than when he departed from this massive island. Even though he hadn't dedicated much time to cultivation, he's obtained the 12 awakening transformations from the Qian Peng race, as well as the lightning wield technique from the Earth Abyss that significantly enhanced the power of his divine Devilbane lightning. After that, he'd consumed the true spirit bloods of the Kuan Peng and the 5-colored peacock, thereby significantly boosting his magic power as well. Even prior to reaching the late deity transformation stage, Han Li had been capable of killing spatial tempering stage beings, so he certainly wasn't going to have any trouble with this demon beast. On top of that, the demon beast didn't even seem to be carrying any treasures, so it stood even less of a chance against Han Li. Han Li inspected the skeletal remains of the demon beast with a cold expression before flicking a finger to blast forth a crimson fireball. The remains of the demon beast immediately caught on fire and were burned to ashes in the blink of an eye. After that, Han Li immediately departed from the scene and had disappeared into the black mist. On this occasion, he had managed to easily kill his opponent, but it was still quite frustrating that he'd had to engage in this battle for no good reason. Of course, unbeknownst to him, he had just killed the behind that all of the mid-grade demon beasts in the hidden Black Mountain ranges saw as their backer and eventual savior. He was the one who was going to eradicate their slave marks and grant them freedom, but those hopes had been completely dashed. Of course, none of that had anything to do with Han Li. He continued to forge ahead in the black mist while contemplating the new sword art. Close to a month later, black mist suddenly surged at the border of the Sea of Mist near a barren mountain, and a humanoid figure emerged from within. He then rose up into the air and reached the summit of the mountain in just a few flashes. He was none other than Han Li, who had just emerged from the sea of black infernal mist. He'd finally made it out of the mist, and he couldn't help but let loose a thunderous roar of excitement and elation, causing the air around him to ring and vibrate, and even the clouds high up in the sky were stirred up as a result. Only then did Han Li assess his surroundings and quickly ascertained his position before flying toward a certain direction as a streak of azure light. After a few flashes, he transformed into a black dot on the horizon, and he completely disappeared following a few flashes more. Azure light flashed before a tall mountain enshrouded in white mist located deep within the hidden Black Mountain ranges, and Han Li appeared at the foot of the mountain. He looked up to the mountain to find that nothing seemed to have changed since his departure, and he made a hand seal as he heaved a long sigh. The white mist before him immediately surged before opening up a path for him. Han Li flew into his cave abode in an unhurried manner before immediately paying his medicine garden a visit. After verifying that everything was in order there, he was completely reassured, and he returned to his living quarters, falling asleep almost as soon as he lay down on his bed. He slept for 2 days and 2 nights. He had rested for a night at the elderly man's cave abode, but on that occasion, he'd naturally been unable to rest to his heart's content. When he finally woke up from his slumber, his exhausted body and mind had both been completely rejuvenated. He got up in high spirits and entered his secret chamber to consolidate the rewards he'd reaped from his trip and continue to consume his true toad spirit liquid. He then had to go into seclusion to reach the pinnacle of the deity transformation stage as soon as possible before attempting a breakthrough to the spatial tempering stage. He also had to refine the wisp of spiritual sense contained within the Qian Peng relic as quickly as possible so he could obtain the true dragon and heavenly phoenix mantras enclosed within the 12 awakening transformations. After that, he'd be able to fuse those true spirit bloods into his body. As for the new sword art and the reinforcement of his flying swords, that was also an urgent matter that had to be taken care of as soon as possible. With that in mind, Han Li made his way toward his secret chamber while laying a hand on the back of his own head. A ball of black light immediately shot forth from the back of his own head before transforming into a miniature black humanoid figure that was several inches tall. It was none other than his second nascent soul. He then rustled both sleeves to summoning his weeping soul beast and leopard Kirin beast. Han Li waved a hand toward the 3 of them with a smile on his face, then tossed the mysterious small vial toward the second nascent soul before departing on his own. The second nascent soul caught the small vial, also with a smile on its face, and only after Han Li had disappeared around the corner did it deliver a few instructions to the 2 beasts, then slowly fly away toward another direction.